So, morning everyone, and thank you for coming to the brutal 9 AM slot after the first beer. My name's Joe Bennett. As old hands of ALP know, I tend to blog conferences, so if I'm blogging your paper later in the week, that's where it'll be. If you find any errors, point them out to me, I'll make changes. If you don't want it online, just tell me and I won't blog it, but it's a nice thing to bring the community together. I like to do that. Tweet lots of stuff about popular music and scholarship as well. So, anyone who's read my previous research knows I've been on a sort of 10, 15-year track of investigating creativity in songwriting. And as time has gone on, that's got me into investigating issues of ownership and what is creativity, what does it mean to own intellectual property, what truly is original, can nothing come from nothing, the Aristotelian concept. So all of these things manifest themselves in the music industry as copyright. But that said, today's presentation is entirely technical and it's about a methodology for detecting samples within tracks, interpolated samples within tracks. Obviously this has a massive crossover to law, and I'm really pleased Franco is here because I found that terrific presentation yesterday very inspiring. But what I do want to make clear at the start is that I'm not talking about law in this particular case. This is about technical methodology for extrapolating the authenticity of a sample from a mix. So that's the single meta question I'm dealing with. And I do this commercially a little bit for music industry clients. They say someone sampled my work, and I often have to write reports to establish the veracity of that, which can then be used by legal professionals in their opening salvos for each other. Very rarely makes it to court, because as Franco said yesterday, these things tend to resolve themselves between the parties because it's simply an economic transaction. So, please don't ask about law. Okay? We can do that over dinner for many hours. So, technical ways you could do it to find the authenticity of the sample. You could use Isotope's RX6 stem finder, which uses fast Fourier transform to take a stereo A file, take a stereo A file and pull it apart into its component stems, and then you run the stems through some kind of database to fingerprint them. A cloud-based solution is basically the same thing. Shazam DMix, you take the audio A file or any audio source in a often noisy environment, run it through Shazam. It will then, in the cloud, strip it down to its component parts and cross-reference that against the database of everything that's ever been out there and identify what the source of the samples are. So those are technical solutions. The only issue with those two is that neither of them exist. The music, so I made up those logos using my limited Photoshop skills. That's the dream. I want those tools.
Photographing now.
So we do not have that technology. DMix from stereo A does not exist. And there are, and great to see Loudon here because he was using RX6 the other night to try and pull apart a sample and remove some high frequency stuff to see if we can clean it up. And it's just about possible with the top skills, which he has. Anyway, I digress. Started by trialing the bots. I wanted to test some of these assertions that YouTube will not, with its algorithms, pick up an interpolated sample. So these are two real quick things that I made. The first one is called The Best Little Robot in Texas, and it is Janis Joplin, her recording of Mercedes-Benz from 1970-ish, and put through a vocoder using Ableton. So this entire track is made what it is, a series of real-time filters. What I love about that, you can hear her Texas accent, even though you're putting it through like a saw wave thing and all this synth processing and filtering. So it's slightly time stretched, but that is still on YouTube. My point about this is it hasn't been auto taken down. And a lot of my academic work gets auto-taken down off YouTube, because as soon as I put a real commercial clip in, it gets detected. And the second one, same thing, basically, poorer technology. You'll hear artifacts on this. This is just a very quick time stretch of James Taylor's Shout of People. Uses logic, and you can hear all the artifacts. So it's the original stereo time stretched up with synthesizer. Again, that's been on YouTube some time and no auto takedown. So, if you do troll the bots, it is possible to beat them. So what that demonstrates really is the takedown algorithms will not detect a sample automatically when it's suitably embedded and matched up. So, these are some of the methods, from the highly technical and computerized to the deeply human and humanities-based, by which we might detect a sample. Automated database comparison, which is what Shazam does. Nulling, so if you've got two audio files in the analog domain that you can play exactly with the waveform synced up, you will hear phase cancellation between them. Well, that's a very easy way of telling if two things are the same, as long as they are clean and not stretched in any way. Visual ways of doing it, spectrographic analysis, frequency top to bottom, time left to right. Waveform analysis, amplitude over time, and that can show you if, for example, a piece of classical music has been sampled, you'll see the dynamic range of it in visual form, though nulling will often give you the same thing. Close listening, just diving right in there and listening over and over. Close listening with pitch and tempo compensation. So you use time stretch algorithms, and I've been really excited by getting into Ableton this year because its algorithms are so much better than some of the tools I've been using previously to do logic. Performance and production anomalies. This is great for the human element because it's the kind of thing a samplist wouldn't bother to reproduce if they re-recorded the sample. By which I mean, if I have a fingerboard scrape 3/16 notes into the bar, and that also appears in the samplist's work, then it's pretty clear that that source is going to be the same. It's not something you bother to recreate. And there's a lot of classical music. I had one of my earliest forensic musicology gigs was looking at whether a recording of Vivaldi's The Four Seasons was the same as a different recording of it. And of course, that time of Concerto Grosso, all the harpsichord parts were improvised. So you basically got a figured bass, and so any anomalies in what the harpsichord player was doing, if they were reproduced in the later work, it was the smoking gun that it came from the sample. Ethnography. If you've got access to the creators, ask them, talk to them. And ethnography in the wider sense of knowing the culture of sampling and creative practice, which relates to this. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of this today. Looking at reverse engineering. If we know what the creative habits are, which is where my own ethnographic songwriting research comes in, we may be able to infer what somebody's likely to have done in that particular sampling subculture and reproduce it and then compare the reproduced version with the allegedly infringing version. So those are the sort of high-level questions that we're asking. Is the original work sampled or re-recorded? Whenever students would, particularly when it was a class was a lot of sampling of the third-year students, they would want to interpolate samples into their work, and I would say, well, why don't, it's only a one-bar drum loop, why don't you just find that drummer over there and put a microphone on them and re-record them? And that's a cultural thing, isn't it? Because we know that often what people want is the production aesthetic, the way that that was recorded, the rhyme on it, if it's with a small g, and those subtle production triggers that tell us it was from a particular era. Has the source been disguised, which is easier and easier to do with better and better time-stretching algorithms, and back to creative process. What are people likely to be doing? Okay, into the music. This is a techno EP by a band called Audiophone called Get Down, allegedly copied by will.i.am in 2013. The first thing you're going to hear is Let's Go, the will.i.am song. It's a pulse saw wave with an LFO going up 2 octaves in a single bar with a 3-3-2 rhythm, da 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 da. 1 bar, 7 notes. Listen out for it. Okay, sorry if you blinked and missed it, there it is again. Now, I think we can all agree, creatively, that's an unusual thing to do. That specific LFO with that specific rhythm and that specific pulse saw wave. This is the 2013 work, this is Will I Am. Here it is again. I bet you can't think of your top 20 favourite tracks that do that. And here's the 2010 sample. Okay, Smoking Gun. Later work, earlier work. That's a weird thing to appear in 2 separate records. So spectrograms, this tells us what octave things are in there. You can see the LFO going across. Do, 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 do. This is the 4-on-the-floor kick drum. Do, 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 do. And with the other one, you've got the back gig. Do, do, clap, do, clap. Right? So here they are again, the later work, the earlier techno. So the characteristics are that it's 1 octave higher. So you can hear that. But also, we've got this hand clap here, which means if you're going to sample this in this, you've got to get rid of this. And also these 2 little clicky things that go. And I actually challenged Loudon, who is the most technical person I know at this kind of stuff and can drive RX6 with it into its life, to try and do that, to try and reverse engineer that. And it's really hard to strip it out. And yet it's such a weird thing to do creatively. There's the waveform, it's over the same time, the partials, the harmonics are the same other than it being in a different octave. It's kind of impossible creatively that these had a different source. They must have come from the same source, because it's just not something you'd independently create. And yet, later work, early work, how would you get rid of those things? How would you clean up that sample enough to do it? Transcription tells us nothing. So supporting Franco's point that codifying something into notation is BS. And so what can we infer? They probably have the same source creatively, but the isolation is technically impossible, at least with that level of clarity with deep listening. So what do we know about creative practice? Well, people are lazy. Ethnography. I did it on Massive. Well, that's kind of helpful. Can't remember how I made it. This is key. This is the original composer. It wasn't a preset. That's Massive at about that time, about 2013. It has a lot of presets and out packs and so on. We have not yet found it, but the inference I make is that it was actually a preset. It's the only thing that fits the facts, which means that the original techno guy did not compose it. Therefore, there's no case to answering copyright terms. That's all I can infer, and that was my recommendation to that person. Right, short on time, so pushing through. Current number 1. But I'm first going to play you a track from 2015. Play it again. Slide is really important. Parallel diatonic tracks. And here's Khalid and Ed Sheeran et al. Current number 1. So again, how likely are those things creatively? It's not all that. There's a harmonic sequence with those specific intervals, with those specific rhythms, and then it's pitched up. So we could match the sample pitching up and use, but with time stretching technologies being so ubiquitous and Ableton being so easy to use, that may not tell us much in reverse engineering terms. Let's compensate. So this is 64 BPM in E minor. This is now compensated. Except you've got those 2 extra chords, which don't appear in the original and couldn't be sampled out. So how would you make those 2 chords out of these chords? Well, you could do it. The intervals are the same in relation to each other. Bit of re-pitching and chopping up and cross-fading. But then we get to known creative practices. Do samplers really do that? Do they go into the original sample and glue it all together and so on? It's not technically impossible. Close listening tells me that there were 0 artifacts here. And when I zoomed right in and slowed everything down to about 20 BPM and played it back, what I realized in the end, through these tests, was the gliss timing was different between the two. And the tremolo timing, the LFO that was on the guitar, was a different rhythmic pulse against the beat, and there was different finger flash noise on the strings when you look really at the high frequencies. So although it sounds like it's really obviously sampled, it in fact wasn't. Listen to the slide. So that slide was from the backbeat flavor there. This one is much later. Just slides that a little bit later, which again in creative practice you wouldn't bother to fake that because it's an interesting anomaly. Right, we're really pushed for time now, but I can blame the tech right for 2 minutes of it. So this is classic Stax record. It's a great record. I wish I could play you more of it because I really enjoy it, even though I've heard it about 1,000 times now working on this project. This is an old soul tune called Help Me Put Out the Flame in My Heart, sampled by Jay-Z on a now deleted track called Paper Chase. We may be able to infer why it was deleted. So here's Ernie Hines, just a couple of bars of him. This riff, which is the famous villain's theme from Victorian times and music hall and the movies. And he plays it, and then he does this big old G minor chord, which he tremolando picks. And then the song starts again.
Whenever you kiss me,
Very cool track.
I feel.
So, classic 1998 sampling, you're gonna, think of Amen Break and all of that stuff in the culture, you're gonna find clean, isolated samples as your sources, because that particular technology, what were we at Akai S900 at that time, that sort of hardware technology, you would look for clean samples and you didn't want to glue them about and mess with them. You would also probably be triggering them on some kind of MIDI device, maybe an MPC that Jay-Z was using at that time. So, let's listen to the riff again, don't talk too much. Whoops.
Whenever you kiss me.
And here's Jay-Z. That's fucking good. We would throw in random G minor chord in there. It doesn't take a lot of muso chops to figure out where that stuff came from. And there's a single note of G. I think it came from here. On close listening. Dum, 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 dum. Dum, 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 dum. Bang! 3 samples, which we will call melody, note, and chord. Here they are in Jay-Z context. Here's me again. Here's Jay-Z. And so on. So, because I was emulating 1998 samples, I didn't do any time stretch. Because again, you kind of could do it with, I think at the time, with some computer technology, but from what we know of what Jay-Z was doing at that time and the likely hardware people had access to, probably an MPC. And indeed, in Ableton, when I recreated this track, which I did entirely by reprogramming all of the drums and making a new version of it entirely from the source, I used Ableton's interface, the grid of which looks very like an MPC, it's got pads and the like, and tried to re-trigger it. That was an interesting exercise. So, thank God for a research presentation with the further work is needed slide. Because this is a bit of advocacy, I guess, this presentation, because I see a lot of bad methodology in musicologists' report, usually biased toward their clients to try and prove a point. And I see really spurious stuff. Franco mentioned some of it yesterday when they go back and find something in the classical repertoire that's melodically similar. But of course, that's it's just not in the culture for someone to go back and find a bit of Mozart and that to be their baseline or whatever, even if the notes are the same. In music note comparison terms, you're really looking at three parameters: pitch, rhythmic values in the bar, and harmonic context. And when those three things come together over any length of time, like a bar or more, it's very likely they've been borrowed. But for the purposes of pure sample detection, which is what I'm talking about today, I think we could come up with some kind of manifesto, and it should come out of a community like ours, really, of what is a consistent method anyone can use to detect interpolated samples. And can it be agreed by all sides in any kind of legal dispute on whether or not someone sampled and when the later party denies it, and really to standardize these technical tools. Of course, if RX7 mixer comes out next year, then you can ignore everything I've said here, because we will have the tool. So that's it for me. Any questions?
Oh, Joe, the guitar, there's the centre track there that you pair that you played. I think kind of creative practice. I mean, most people just pick up a guitar and play it again. You would, wouldn't you, if you wanted to rip that one off?
Well, for that, and a little bit of background on that, I looked up the co-writing, and Ed Sheeran's on it. So you've got Ed Sheeran in the room, saying, right, here's the riff. And Ed Sheeran has a track record of playing parallel tenths on the fifth and second string of the guitar with fingerstyle clawing. So, yeah, why would you bother when your intention is not to evoke the production of the previous record, which was only in 2015? So I agree, they almost certainly they probably did make the riff, but E minor D, G, C is not exactly subject to copyright. Maybe those rhythms are maybe in context as notes, but in terms of the sound recording, yeah, why would they? Yeah, therefore, they probably didn't.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, as a practicing guitar teacher, that's kind of really your blackbird shapes.
It is, it's indeed the same.
And the amount of kids, 14, 15 years old, who come and go, look at this new song I did, and it's that.
It is. This is where you get into the Venn diagram of intersecting musical elements. It's not just E minor, D, G, C, which you can all agree appears in thousands of works. It's E minor for a half bar, D and G for one beat each, sliding down X number of frets in that position on those strings with that aesthetic. And the challenge, if we were opposing sides in a musicologist's debate, advocating for our clients, which we're not supposed to do, the challenge will be to find the prior work that actually does that. You're right, lots of students do something that's a bit in that zone, but when those specific factors come together, the odds of independent creation, which in law is perfectly allowed, we all write songs that are identical to each other, if we can demonstrate they're independently creative, there's no case to answer, which is why access to the audio is recorded. But you're absolutely right, that's lots of people do that blackbird thing. And it would have been, so the guess is that they had Ed Sheeran in the room, and Charles, what you said, David, just can you play that blackbird thing, but do it a bit cleaner than on this sample that we've used in the early demo. So maybe
any more questions? We're just thinking about your last comments about classical music and sort of using that or sampling. I mean, I guess a certain form of hip hop aesthetics likes taking records that are obscure and not in their genre, right? And I don't think that's what you were talking about. I think you were talking about sort of using motives and sort of maybe
No, because this presentation is entirely about sampling.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So yes,
okay.
The hip hop is definitely we're in that zone, and I think you're absolutely right that they want the aesthetic of the envelope, the EQ curve, the mic placement, the ambient reverb of the room. That's why you sample old soul or reggae.
Yeah. Or just to create an effect. I mean, it's quite jarring when something like the exhibit Symphony in X Major, which uses Wendy Carlos' switched on Bach version of Brandenburg 3. I mean, it's a particular recording of Bach, right? But many times they're trying to create an effect of that genre, like we're sort of riffing on classical music, I think, sometimes. But I was wondering too, I mean, you can't sample, you can't sample someone else's recording. But it gets to a certain point, looking at the Jay-Z example, and when you think about pads and the way technology has come up, I mean, they're sort of playing it like a synthesizer almost. And so, I mean, is there any allowance whatsoever? I know what the law is, but you're performing these recordings in such a way that, yes, that's the source, but I mean, you're doing something so different with it. Is there any? Do those arguments
It's
happen?
not a question of sound detection, it's a question of law.
Yeah.
It is the gesture of using NPC and performing somebody else's work in micro samples and small samples, is that a creative act? Almost certainly. That's not really the debate. Is it using somebody else's work in a detectable way? Yes, absolutely. Is it transformative in creative recontextualization? No question. Is that legal? Discuss. Yeah.
Just a quick one, Joe. You used the word interpolation. Quite a lot of people, when they're talking about sampling, I think even including who sampled, use interpolation to mean like a replay or a copy rather than the original thing. So I think that's another problem in this area. People use language to mean different things as well.
Yeah, exactly. We need to standardise methodology, we need to standardise terminology. Mind you, ask two songwriters what a bridge is. Yeah, there's a difference between a bridge and a pre-chorus and a middle eight. So yeah, we could all do with a little bit of that in our field, couldn't we? Standardising terminology.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.